Good morning, everybody. Thank y'all for joining us. We're so excited.
Good morning.
Good morning, Asa. Is that everybody in our waiting room, whatever you call that?
I think so.
Yes. Thanks, Amy. Sam and I were saying, we had bigger numbers to begin with, but we're so thankful for those that we've seen almost every week and that y'all keep coming back, and just really allows us to have some good discussion and making the connection that throughout the entire week. So thank you all so much for being here. Just a quick few reminders that try to keep your Zoom on mute unless you want to say something, or it's your turn to talk. And remember, you can raise your hand using that little thing next to reactions, or you can kind of do this and we will try to see it. And then of course, use the chat as you want to, and we will be reading those comments from there. So do use those. We're kind of sad that it's our last week, kind of happy only because we're like, we got more stuff we got to get done. But it's been so important for Sam and I. Every time we have a conversation, we end up having another conversation after our study that goes on for another 20 minutes, Sam and I do. And so we're still processing and learning along with y'all and trying to figure out where we're going to go from here. So today we want to spend a lot of time covering our homework questions and giving you all time to have those types of conversations together as well, because we're learning from those. We're going to be referring to chapters 11 and 12 and then the conclusion. But we are going to be skipping around a bit. We're not going to be following, going straight from 11 to 12 to the conclusion. So we're going to give you lots of time to discuss. So I hope you all will be willing to talk and willing to share. And I do want to start with sharing. We're going to give ourselves 3 minutes because we have a lot we want to hear from you all over the course of the next hour. But what is your homework included the question, what's something you've learned from this study? I think you had 3. And by the way, we have a Google form. If you didn't get to that yet, don't worry about it. There'll be time afterwards. We just want to have a lot of what we're going to be discussing down on paper so that Sam and I can go back and use that information better. So what have you learned, or what is one thing you've learned from this study?
I'd like to share that I learned in telling my brother in California about this study that more people than church people are interested in this, and that he shared with me that one of the differences that I don't think we mentioned between different classes of people is homeless, or as he prefers to call it, houseless people, talk more loudly than we do. We use an indoor voice, and he was talking about it from the standpoint of libraries, but he said he thought it would be helpful for us that to remember that many of us react to louder volume as aggression or anger, and it's just a difference in people's cultural setting. If you're houseless, you have to raise your voice so you can be heard. So that's
interesting. Yeah. Paul is shaking his head. Yep.
Yeah, I'm constantly when we're gathered and I hear loud voices. I constantly have to go, okay, wait, is that a danger or not? And I have to look at people's faces to see if they are smiling at each other or if they're, bowed up and there is potentially a confrontation going on.
Yeah.
But it's still not automatic for me to hear loud voices and know immediately what the situation is.
Yeah. Karen?
I would add to that too, looking you in the eye through my years of teaching and just working in the community and stuff with in different cultures, and also people who are challenged socioeconomically. They often will not look you in the eye, and some people see that as a sign of disrespect, and it's not.
That's interesting. Anybody else want to share what they've learned? Unmute, Asa. Unmute.
We're controlling that. Okay. I guess I was really very sharply reminded of the differences in the way people think and the different value systems between segments of our society. That learning gives me renewed insight, but it also gives me some concern. I don't have time for the long story, but I'll never forget meeting with a couple of people, one of which was John Lipton, and some of you remember him being Speaker of the House. I was told that he was slow and dim-witted and was not very cognizant of what was going on in socioeconomic, and I was going to have to be sure that I communicated. When all of a sudden I discovered, wait a minute, this man outsmarts me real quick. And that's the problem. That is a problem. So that's my concern, is that we have some very intelligent, smart, poor people. And we're going to have to be careful, but maybe we can understand a little bit more after this. Certainly, in hindsight, as I look about the work that we have done with alternative services and so forth, it really explains a lot of the phenomena that I've seen happening here.
Interesting. And I think that's one reason we chose this book, because for me, it challenged my assumptions. One, that everybody would want to be middle class. Everybody wants to be out of poverty, and they just don't. And so I think that's been one of my most important learnings for sure. Yeah.
Mary, this is Melanie.
Yeah. Hey.
I really appreciate Danita being in the class, and I've texted her right now. Where are you? I appreciate her honesty. I learned, and we've continued the discussion in our office about the differences in the worship styles of different cultures, and that's been very beneficial for me, and produced some real good conversations.
Yeah. Good. I've enjoyed Danita in it as well too. Nikki?
I was going to say the chapter about family dynamics, that was very interesting, and it wasn't necessarily surprising. It kind of all made, but it just made all this make sense, and to see the verbiage and all the specifics. And I found that a real learning curve for me.
Yeah. Thank you, Nikki. Karen, your hand is raised as well. Still, is that from last time?
No, it's from this time because I'm just now figuring it out. So I was just going to comment too that I've really appreciated the unspoken rules of each class, because working for Ozark Mission Project and actually walking into people's homes that we're talking about, it's sometimes you just think, oh my word, and you don't know what you're walking into, and you see things in their homes and you're like, how come they have that latest gaming system? But here we are, they've got holes in their floors and there's a possum that gets in. You know, and so I think that, and I've kind of been aware, but this really hit at home, and I'm definitely going to create sort of a better process for letting our students understand what they're walking into, because sometimes they don't zip it. This is the way the adults can walk in and do.
Yeah.
You know? And I also, when I am talking to my college students that are on my staff, I talk about ways for them to find things to talk about with their neighbors, the people whose homes we go to, and, you know, to look for things to talk about for how to build relationships. And so this class has really kind of lit a fire for me to write something up officially, like to create an official document for those two things.
Share that document when you get done. It'll probably be
I don't know
helpful
if I
for a
want to
lot
get a
of
grade
us.
on it.
Yeah. Great. Judy?
I was just going to echo some things I've heard already, but also the one piece that was new to me, that fits in with the other are the registers on the language and listening to the spoken word, and also being aware of my own use of that in conversation with other people. I actually have put that into practice, and it's been very helpful to be more aware of those things. It's been helpful. Thank you.
Melanie, I want to recognize that you had your hand up. If you would like to speak, that'll be our last one, and then we're going to keep moving forward.
Sam, I just wanted to piggyback on Karen's comment. I know that you go into a lot of homes and you expect the worst, but that's not always true. As a principal, I used to visit homes of students for whatever reason, and some that were at that time considered to be in the project, they were living in government housing. I was many times amazed at how clean and neat and straight things were in those homes, and wished my own home was as clean as theirs. So poverty does not always equal filth or a messy house even.
Or even an unstable house, it just means that there's more stressors in it. So I think that's a great realization that shows our stereotyping that I have tended to do before. I assume every house is filthy and bad parenting, or, and that's just not true. It's just not true. Okay, Sam.
All right. Well, friends, as we get started, let's open with the word of prayer, if you'll join me. Holy and precious God, we invite you into this space today. We thank you for all that we've learned, for all of the things that we're thinking about and dreaming about as to how to be in relationship with others, especially across differences. Lord, we pray that today you would open our hearts and minds to each other and to the ways that you are moving within us, that we might see what our next steps could be. It's in your holy and precious name we pray. Amen. All right. Our scripture for this morning comes from Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25. And it says this, "And let us consider each other carefully for the purpose of sparking love and good deeds. Don't stop meeting together with other believers, which some people have gotten into the habit of doing. Instead, encourage each other, especially as you see the day drawing near." As we were thinking about this being our last week together, we want to share this scripture. Mary Louise and I found this really particularly important to think about as a way of expressing our feelings toward this journey that we've been on with all of you. I think our hopes and prayers and expectations have all just completely been blown out of the water by the conversations that we've had, by the wonderful work that we're hearing that you're doing. And now as we prepare for what's next, I want you to hear that we're in this together. I think sometimes we get so into our own silos of ministry, especially when it comes to ministry and outreach in our community, that sometimes we feel like we're all alone in the work, or we can feel like we're the only one doing it. And I want you to be encouraged that this is a community, this is a space where we want you to feel like you can come. We want you to feel like you can reach out to people in this group. And where our ability to meet with one another, to experience that connection, doesn't have to stop because the study's over, right? We want to continue to lift each other up, and we want to continue to reach out to one another going forward. So I hope that as we kind of think about this and think about our next steps, that we can also be thinking about what are some ways that we can encourage one another. And it may just be thinking about one person in this group that you've enjoyed hearing from them, and reaching out to them and offering them a note of encouragement every once in a while. Or it could be that that we need to create some sort of unofficial group that we meet a little bit regularly, whether it's quarterly or monthly, to kind of talk through what's going on in our ministries. But we certainly don't want this encouragement to stop here. And so I hope that we can remember this verse of encouraging each other, of not stopping meeting together, because we have been so overwhelmed by this group and by the joy and the excitement and just the love that you bring. And we certainly don't want it to end here. So that is where we are.
Thanks, Pam. So last week we discussed the 8 life resources that allow for human capacity, or another way of saying it, to allow for the opportunity to make healthy decisions for a stable life. The authors are guiding us to this understanding of what people need in order to have the opportunity for choices, the opportunity for choices in their life. And that includes the choice of leaving poverty. They are also challenging us to be realistic about what we as a congregation, or rather people in relationship with someone with greater need, is willing to do, and just how far we are willing to go. So the homework asked you to pick 2 people and conduct a resources inventory, which is a tool to quantify the resources individuals have for bearing their own and others' burdens. So it's not just about for people who are in poverty, it's for all of us. How much can we bear of our own burdens, and how much can we bear of others' burdens? And according to the authors, we asked, they were saying that we asked to complete, you to complete the inventory for someone, 2 people. It didn't really matter who. It could be somebody in your ministry, a biblical character, somebody real, somebody not, just anyone. So I wanted to kind of get your feedback on that experience. What did you kind of enjoy doing about it? What challenged you about it? And what did you think about the results? So who did this? Did anybody do it besides me? Okay. Carrie, do you want to talk about your experience of doing it? You'll need to unmute first.
I realize that as we think about the people who don't have the kind of resources that we do, some of the ways that we may impact them without realizing it. And in the book, it tells us that when people come in, if it's the kind of middle class or upper class stilted service that we've always had, that maybe that's not what they're used to. Or if you look around and see people who are fancy dressed and they're not, then, maybe that's not what they would think. So I have seen us kind of go from, fancy dress since 1975, when I first came to Garrow Springs, to, jeans or slacks, and certainly we wore dresses at first, but now everybody's kind of more relaxed. And we have tried, in the interest of trying to incorporate diversity, tried to embrace things in different cultures that would make us a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But being open to seeing what would happen. So, and I think too, we realized that sometimes when people on the scale, if they don't have exactly the resources we do, they bring other things to the table.
Yes.
They bring a love for different people and sharing stuff with us that maybe we hadn't before. And particularly, like I'm thinking in our food pantry, they have brought, maybe they don't come to every church service, but they're there. One of our food pantry clients that we got to know really well. And I finally just said to him, I'm giving you the key. You're one of us. And he's in the church. And now he's one of our trustees.
That's great. Yeah.
He sold his guns and bought a trailer, and we use it now for the food pantry. We call on him to let people in.
Carrie, I think that's just an amazing way to express one of the most important things of learning for us, is that everybody has something to bring to the table. They're just different things. And I think that's great. Yeah. Anybody else have anything they want to say about their experience of doing the resource inventory? Asa?
I did the inventory as prescribed and felt like it was really quite accurate. Two people that I know very, very well. One would almost one you could almost call poor, not in poverty. By the way, there's a difference. I wish we could talk about that a little bit. But I just thought it was a pretty good description of that individual. And I thought nailed her, as far as my perception of her and her life. She's a very good person. Yeah.
And you said something that kind of hit home to me with what my experience was, is that it's our perception of what their life is like and what they're like and what their resources are. And how amazing would it be to be able to know somebody well enough when we do this assessment to know whether or not we're right in our perceptions about them. And so I think that was, I don't know, that was something I had to make assumptions about what I understood somebody's family life to be like. So, yeah.
We may start doing this with our friends that we're working with in a specific intensive way where we could score them and they could score themselves and see that, what resources they have to bear. Might be interesting to do.
Yeah. Nikki, that's a great quote she put in the chat. Different is not a deficient. And she heard that on another recent webinar around racism. And I think that's a big learning lesson of this. Nikki? Yeah.
Deficit.
Sorry, I read that wrong.
I may typed it wrong. I'm more, because I can't see deficit. Okay. I need little short, catchy phrases to help me remember. And I play that over and over in my brain so many times. Different is not a deficit.
And that's what this learning, I think, hearing the differences between the classes helps us see that there's not a deficit. It's just we're different. And so how do we bridge that? So another book calls it social bridging the differences. Yeah. Anybody else want to speak to the resource inventory experience before we move on? Okay. So, and Amy's going to be pulling up slide 3. And Payne and Eilig, or Elig, I forget how to pronounce it, give us 5 steps in determining and designing and implementing a ministry in which we commit to helping people. And this is on pages 118 through 120. And I just wanted to list the headings for you, especially if you didn't have the book or didn't read it. But the first step is to begin with studying your community, understanding the context and the needs of your community. The second was studying your resources, assessing really what we have as a congregation, whether it's human, physical, financial, time, any of our types of resources. That includes buildings and volunteers and all of that. But also the capacity at which we want, again, that big question of how far are we willing to go. The third one was actually studying those you're aiming to serve. And I think one is the resource assessment that maybe Paul is talking about doing with his folks, but it's also truly asking somebody else, what do you need who come to your food pantries or your any type of ministry you have. But to me, that second question is just important. How can they be part of the solution? One of the best examples I have of that is FAN, the Friends and Neighbors Network, which is where those who need the food come together every month, order it together, distribute it among themselves, and spend an hour or so together. And so truly the only reason the church volunteers are there are to help support them and provide the financial resources to do it. But they use the skills of the people in that group to actually help them get the food they need. The fourth one is counting the costs, and again, being realistic about what we can accomplish in the short term and long term. And we'll be talking about that as a group. And then last thing is specialize. And I think most of us would say we definitely need to specialize, but I think about these small churches without a lot of people. And maybe they can go deeper into a relationship with somebody, but maybe only one or two families, whereas larger churches may need to be specialized in something big. And I'm not saying that's an either or. It's just another way of considering how much can we do and how much capacity do we have to bear other people's burdens. So those are the 5 steps, and just kind of ask you a few questions about that. Looking at your current ministries, do you think you actually use some of these resources, steps without recognizing it, or did you intentionally do it? And what do you think that benefited your program, or how that benefited your program? Has anybody kind of used these steps? Amy, you can take those off the screen so we can see whose hands are up. Or do you know what some of the resources of your own congregation are, and you can kind of start implementing these steps and thinking about these steps? You clergy may know that we have the church, and I haven't used it except for one occasion, Mission Insight. Does anybody use Mission Insight? Judy, have you ever used it? Can you explain how you use that to assess community? And lay people, if you want it, access to this, you just go to your clergy. Every clergy member has this. So you're on mute, Judy. Oh, you're eating too. Sorry, I got you.
Here, let me jump in for.
Okay, thanks, Pam.
When we are appointed to a new have a new appointment, one of the practices of our mission specialist, the district superintendent, is to make sure that we understand the insight data for our appointment. When I was appointed to St. Paul before COVID, Kathy Hall was the person at the conference office who helped me figure out the parameters of our neighborhood. Post-COVID, and I had this discussion with her the other day, I realized our neighborhood that I drew was too large and that we need to pull back into a more reasonable assessment of what our neighborhood is. And so what we found fascinating was the poverty in our neighborhood is small, but very deep. So we have people who are in apartments or duplexes, many of whom are single parents with more than one child, living at below a living wage. But then the rest of our neighborhood is the same as it was when it began in the 60s.
Huh.
But the difference between the 60s and now is that in the 60s, the people who moved in thought they were supposed to come to church. And now people don't necessarily do that. So we're looking at other strategies. But the insight data is very helpful because it does tell you, I mean, it can almost drill down to stuff that you'd be embarrassed to think that somebody's drilling down to find out about you where you live. But very helpful data.
Yeah,
And it also tells you stuff about their where they work in terms of what kind of employment and education, the ages of the children, and it breaks them into these little groups of empty nesters with lots of money, empty nesters who like to travel. You know, it's fascinating stuff. And it is a part of the benefits of being in a connectional church, friends.
Yeah.
So, and Amy's pointed out it's Jacob Turner who is our contact now. So don't be afraid to ask for help, and push your clergy to do what they're supposed to do.
I mean, how?
I'll
go.
step in here. A couple of things that are interesting. I have a son who's getting a PhD in political science, and he looked at it and he said, "Mom, there are 913 people in your county who identify as United Methodists." And when we started looking at how many are in the pews in each church and how many could be in the pews, like how many each church could hold, it's like, where are the 700 and some, so that was really helpful to think, oh, if you identify as United Methodist, where are you, and how to begin to step into that. We Are Your Church, you join with us in that. And then another interesting thing, Pam kind of hit on the different things you find out in magazine. One of the little communities where I serve, we have an unusually high children population. It equals an urban setting rather than a small rural community. And our children are in deep poverty in that community, and it's generational poverty. So instead of just band-aiding the poverty and not recognizing that we have so many kids, as a community, we've been stepping in, trying to help deal with things that are generational and breaking that cycle. And also just more resources directly at the children and families. And then another thing that I thought was kind of interesting she mentioned was we have a high number of commuters, like the young families that are not in poverty, they're commuting to better jobs. So we needed to look at long-term, how can we offer jobs so you don't have to be gone? Because a lot of reasons, we have these latchkey situations, lack of childcare. There's a lot of trouble when you have to commute so far, and families are exhausted and they don't want to put one more thing on their calendar when it takes them 12 hours a day just to work and commute back and forth to work. So yeah, do it. It's awesome. And you'll, it's been good, I know, in my communities to hone in exactly what do we need to be doing rather than just kind of flailing out a bunch of ideas and seeing what takes hold. It makes a bigger difference, I think, long term.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'd also like to add that, hey, everybody, I'd like to add that Mission Insight helped us realize that Southwest Little Rock is majority African American. And, the way we look at it, a lot of times we say, okay, well, that's, a lot of Latinas there are quite a few Latinos, but it is basically 65% African American in the area. So where we were trying to make, the focus be Latin Americans or, Spanish speaking individuals, it's not necessarily primary anymore after we found that information out.
It's really important, I think, to assess the community and then really drill down into what's going to be most helpful to those in your community, and be willing to do something different, to let something go so that you can do something that's going to be more effective. And when we're talking about kids in poverty, from my perspective, is 200,000 more reasons, after school places for kids to go during the summer when they're parents, those are those programs that are really going to make a difference to the families who you don't really care whether or not they come to the church. You'd love for them to be there, but just to be that place in the community that's known for something. Could it be what they need? And that's childcare assistance or literacy homework or meals, that kind of thing. So that's kind of the hope that in doing these steps, you really kind of meet people where they need you to meet them. So, yeah. Okay. Sam, I think Sam had to kind of cut out. She is on and listening. Do you want to say something really quick, Sam? Are you in the car?
I am in the car. I'm so sorry, guys. No, I agree. Learning how to use Mission Insight is part of what we do with pastors who are coming up through the ordination process too. And I think it's really, it is a really important piece of how we learn about our community. But also, I think the other thing that we do that's important is recognizing the resources in our congregation, and seeing like the kind of building resources we have, the kind of personnel resources we have, and how those impact how we function as a church and how we impact our community, right? Which I think, and I think that's important because when we think about when we count the cost, those are some of the things that we have to really be thinking about too, because the people who are currently in our church are the people who are giving, right? We would love to think the people who are outside our church are going to be the ones giving eventually, but in that transitional time, it's hard to figure out where the financial resources are going to come from. And so we have to pay attention to who is in the pews and then who is perhaps outside, and how we help connect them there. And so so when we think about like the ways that we measure that is, you know, we've just gotten done, a lot of us, with charge conference reports. But I mean, Ruby Payne and Bill Alig both point out that there are some really important other things that we need to be looking at too. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy's gonna be pulling up that slide. For those of y'all who aren't necessarily familiar with the charge conference report, it's like, how many baptisms do you have? How many new people did you have? How many new members joined? So those are kind of the touch points of measuring measuring whether or not
It's also a whole lot more than that. Don't let
it
them think it's
is.
that
It is,
easy.
Melanie. No, it is, Melanie. I'm just talking
Because
about, it's an
Melanie's-
enormous report, guys. Don't worry about it. But some of the questions, in Melanie, you can tell us whether or not some of these are on the charge conference report. But some of the questions Bill Payne and Isla kind of say is kind of challenge us to ask these types of questions in believing that the economic base will continue to stay. You're taking risks now, but in 20 years, you'll still have a positive economic base. Karen, did you want to say anything? I see your hand up.
I did. So kind of bear with me on the backstory here, but I'll be quick. So this past summer for Ozark Mission Project, I got a phone call from Jim Polk, and he said, we've got a group from Florida who is outside of Eureka Springs, and their mission work has fallen through. And they're from Florida, they're United Methodist, they called the conference Connectional Church. Within 2 hours, they were sitting at my kitchen table. And I was going through Ozark Mission Project applications that we were getting ready to use in our area to try to find them mission work. So, and we did, by the way, and it was awesome. It was an awesome story. But so the senior pastor, Matt Horan, we were talking about true crime. And I don't know why. It's like, I listen to true crime all the time. He goes, I wrote a book about true crime. I said, no way. I want to read it. So I got his book. He was a senior pastor at Seminole Heights in Florida. I'm reading this book and I'm like, yeah, this book's about true crime. There was a serial killer in his town. And so he's telling this story. This book is about how to connect your church to your community. This book was about how his church supported and loved this community that was going through this horrible thing. And had his church not really dug into this community beforehand, they would not have been able to serve them the way that they did during this crisis. And so I sent the book to the rest of my OMP staff, and I was like, you guys have got to read this. And everybody's like, this is crazy. This is the best book we've read. And then again, I was in St. Pete's Beach last month, and I went and had lunch with Matt and his youth director, Peggy, because they were both here in my home. But we're buying this book in bulk now, and we're going to share it with our college staff. And I'm like, this is even something that could come to annual conference. This man can teach us how to love our neighbors. I would absolutely recommend reading this book. It's called Church Bells at Midnight. And yes, there's a serial killing in it, but it's more about how to connect your church to your community. I feel like it should be required reading.
Okay, we're going to add that to our reading list. Sam and I will, for sure.
And you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Amazon. But
Nice.
and while I'm reading it, I'm thinking, and having been on a church staff, I'm like, I would love to be on this man's church staff. He's fabulous.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But he's
And
also
so-
every man.
Every man, yeah. So
He's
reading, having seen these questions on the screen, you know, how many interventions were made in neighborhoods of poverty, what kinds and how many linkages were established for social service agencies. Most of these questions don't really get to, really get to how are we being in the community. And Amy, if you can go back to the previous screen, that'd be great. Thanks. And so, okay, she ended. How many individuals were helped with transition from poverty to work? What kinds of continuing education did the church provide to assist with transitions? These questions were in the book, and I'm failing to see the actual page. But I thought these were an interesting understanding of what kind of the church can do in a community and how we measure success for a particular ministry. And Melanie, I don't know if you were able to see the screen. If any of these questions are loosely connected to questions on charge conference reports, it'd be interesting to know, but what it would feel like to ask these questions of our success. And they're a great way for us to identify what we're doing now, but also creating this long range plan that I think we kind of react to a lot of things that don't necessarily get into the meat of real quick. But I want us to kind of start thinking long-term and short-term. So change is one of the most consistent things about being a Methodist church. Your leadership changes regularly. So how do we look at what we are capable of doing long-term and short-term? And that's really kind of a question for us lay. And we're not talking about moving people from poverty into our church pews in the next 6 months. We are talking about community investments that could take decades to bear substantial fruit. I don't know if any of you read the story in the very beginning of chapter 12, and it's about this woman who kind of finds her way with the help of her church. And the main point was it had taken her 28 years to get to where she was. This wasn't something that happened in just a few years, but in a generation. And we've encountered this also with our literacy ministry, this kind of return on investment. Everybody's like, well, how are you measuring whether or not they're reading? Like we're measuring it, but really we are hoping for long-term solutions. Yes, we want them to be reading now, but the ultimate goal is so that they can have choices later in life. And so they can learn to read to learn, and then really make good choices, or have options for choices as they get older and finish school. So four of the key takeaways from Payne and Ehlig include collecting a wide database of information about current and future needs. And you can take this off the screen. I think everybody's been a chance to read it. And that includes maybe looking at the mission insight trends. There's also other census data we can look at. It also means thinking about multiple approaches to long-term goals, like addressing mothers' education by providing childcare and educational opportunities, as well as helping to develop powerful role models for the young men in poverty. So you can have these multiple, when you're talking about ministry, short-term, you can have some ministries, but long-term, what is our goal with those ministries? And that's something we want to give you all a moment to talk about in small groups. When we think about how we can begin to talk about long-range planning and assessing resources, it's important to note that many of our communities are changing. We have a lot of congregations like Geyer Springs that have changed over the past 20, 30, 40 years. And congregations are planted in neighborhoods that have transitioned in terms of race or economics, and from downtown to rural. People have moved, urban, suburban, I can't talk. You have a downtown church that had all these people around, and now there are not a lot of people living in downtown. Everybody's moved out to the suburbs. So how do we adjust to these needs of our immediate community? That's kind of our short-term and long-term question. How do we adjust to the immediate needs of our community? Perhaps some good things to ask ourselves are, do the people in your pews live in the neighborhood? This is a question the author posed to us. And who lives within walking distance of the church if you're not a rural church? Our buildings are some of our most bountiful resources right now. How can we offer those to our community for more than just worship? What does it look like to open classrooms for learning or partnering with other organizations needing space to host programs and events? That's a big question for us around the mental health and stability piece for our families in other ministries. We want to give you time, though, to talk about this. I can go on and on. I can tell you how I'd like for you to use your building, but I'm going to let you all discuss how you can use your building. We're going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes to kind of think the question. And Amy's going to put a slide up of these questions real quick. And they are, in this short term, what could your church offer to people in need? What about in the long term? And then consider the members who compromise your congregation's current financial base. How open are they to the inclusion of different cultural and economic groups? Meaning, how much are we willing to adapt to the transitions that may be happening in our neighborhoods? And then what long-term decisions might you make because of that? again, we can't change everything. We can change some things, but some things just aren't going to change. So how do we adapt to that? How do we still find ways to be in ministry to our community? So I'm going to put these questions in the chat. Amy's going to break you all up into groups so that you can discuss these questions and really just kind of brainstorm what you are hoping long-term, short-term for your community and your church's ministry to the community. All right, I'm putting those questions in the chat now. They're there. Amy's going to break us up into groups. Sorry, I needed somebody. Thank you for telling me I was muted. Okay, we don't have a whole lot of time left, so I'm going to allow one group to kind of discuss what they shared among themselves with the rest of us, and then I want everybody else to use the group chat just to kind of say how you're going to use your congregations. So which group had a particularly big aha moment? Okay, not even a big aha moment, just something that was interesting.
I think Pam should share what she shared in our group. That was an aha moment for me.
Yeah. So Pam, how are you going to use your congregation's resources?
Okay, so very succinctly, my people are average age older, but are very politically savvy and are interested in doing things that make a difference. So we're going to take the stance of what can we do to affect change of systems. And one thing that we discovered is in Little Rock, the water utility bill is a major impediment to people in poverty. The central, the utility service is prohibited by law from having any arrangement to assist people with their water bills. That doesn't mean that other agencies can't do it, but they can't do it. And there are places where water utilities cut a person's bill, cut their account off the day after you don't pay. And we could address that from a political standpoint. So although I sometimes get discouraged about, well, I don't have volunteers who can go do stuff like volunteer with Paul's ministry, I do have a cadre of people who understand systems and politics, and that's what we're going to go for.
I love that, Pam. I love it.
Thanks.
Yep, I love it. So people do be putting in the chat how you might use everyone. Bye, Pam. Thank you for joining us in your congregation. What are some of your hopes and dreams and long-term goals? We want to keep sharing. But we want to start wrapping up because I really want to kind of hear from you all about what's next. I liked how in the conclusion of the book, they kind of offer, the authors challenge us to ask ourselves this one question: have we provided the support, teaching, and relationships that will allow these persons to move into a more stable, constructive, and spiritual life if they so desire? And that's our goal with our compassionate ministries in many ways, is not just meeting their need, but also are we providing the relationships, the support, and teaching that allow them more choices. And I know for us, as we develop resources and ministry ideas, Sam and I will be asking this question a lot, and a lot in our evaluation and how we put resources together and what we're teaching. So I wanted to know kind of where do we go from here? From you all, what are your next steps and what resources do you need? And we can ask some of those questions in general, but also what is needed in the local context. So what do you need locally? And then, well, let's just start there. Kind of where do you go from here? What do you want to see happen next? And what resources do you need from us, even if they're in the local context and they're not necessarily from us, but some kind of support?
I need people to stop labeling Canvas Community as a homeless church. Because and that means that other people don't come to church. So people with resources aren't coming. So it's just, I'm not going to say this very well because I could get really, but if you can hear what I'm saying.
We do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It is a church that includes all people, including those without houses.
Right, and it has an incredible homeless ministry, and I have a problem with just labeling homeless people. At least don't say the homeless, and there are so many other words that Canvas does use. But yeah, when we label the homeless or the poor or labeling anyone, I don't like being labeled a widow, and so the labels, and it's, yeah.
Here. Yes.
Can I say something to that? Coming from Hoover, the drug church, the crackhead church, the addict church, I know all about those labels, but here's the way you can flip that thing is the fact that if we are missionally minded, if we are about the people that we serve, listen, then that label sends those people in need to us. And so although we do want folks that got money to come, if somebody knows they need some help with drug rehab, everybody knows that's what Hoover is, and if they are unhoused, however you want to call it, and they're downtown, everybody knows that's Canvas Church. And so it is negative in as much as we want people who don't fit in those categories to understand. We want you too, but I'm like, if we are about what we say we're about, don't let it get you upset. Just keep on going, because the people who need to know that that's the homeless church know when they need help, they come.
Yeah. I like that too.
That's what we're trying to do, is just be together, have more people be together, and across the lines, which is kind of why I wanted to jump in on this to see how that might work better. Because it's really tricky to balance people's expectations of worship from a middle class perspective with worship from people in poverty perspective. And I'm still not sure that can be done. You have to decide who you're going to aim at and get some people from one side or the other to agree to go anyway, even though it's not aimed at them. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't have so many options to offer worship. So how can you meet, especially these smaller churches, how can you meet all those needs and desires in one worship service?
This is addressing very strongly, and it deserves a subject that deserves a meeting on its own right. About the point has been made by both speakers, but when I look at the problem of trying to, once you have a congregation in place that has a certain ring to it, if you start running a bunch of yuppies in on Canvas Church, for example, and I'm going to talk just in general terms, if it becomes 50% yuppie, 60% yuppie, what's going to happen to the homeless? It is my experience and that I have observed that the homeless aren't going to show up, because all of a sudden that's not home anymore. It's different. And I have a worship service now that's going on in our church that I guarantee you that phenomenon happened. And it's full of doctors and lawyers now, but I don't see a poor folk in that service at all. And we used to have over half.
Mm-hmm.
That's worth talking about, big time.
Well, and part of it is that people want to see people like themselves, and that's no matter which class you're in, right? So, yeah. So that's something we have to okay, I made a note of that. We're making a note of that. How do we discuss understanding ministry, especially in worship services that really have to meet a diverse people, and how do we create home? And again, I think it's a lot of some of the conversation we've had before, and in fact that can we offer more than just one type, one connection? Yeah. Anybody else have any next steps or thoughts or hopes that you want to do differently or
me?
Okay.
At Geyer Springs, we have an amazing gym space. However, the floor needs to be replaced. And so it is my hope that we find funds to get that floor fixed so that we can open it up for indoor sports like basketball, volleyball, kickball, or whatever it is that we can open it up to our community. Because right now it's just a glorified warehouse for our food stuff. So that and at St. Andrew, just utilization of space for people again. Because both churches now, food boxes are what run the space. I mean, it's just everywhere. And I mean, it's a good ministry, but it's a good ministry in each church. And it shouldn't be the focus, in my opinion. So I'm thinking we need to figure out ways to get people in the church, and programming is the way you get people in the church.
Yeah. And using those that you're serving to be part of that leadership and programming too, helping you have them be part of that design.
Right.
All right. Any other final thoughts or closing remarks that you all wanted to make? We want to hear from you all as much as possible.
Okay, I have something. Does it directly relate? But yes, it does. Okay, over the weekend, I was working an event in Memphis at a very wealthy high school. And I've become real aware of how our government, our society, our culture, even our churches have divided, our economically divided our neighborhoods. But I was in this really wealthy school. I go in this swanky hospitality room, teachers, and I see this book about Ruby Payne and poverty. And I'm thinking, whoa, why, what are they? I walked closer, picked it up. The title was Emotional Poverty. So these wealthy kids, and this is a real brief generalization, are suffering from emotional poverty. I just thought that was interesting.
I think that's a lot of her focus on her new work, that she's kind of moved from building human capacity to emotion, still doing it, but focusing on the emotional poverty of kids. Yeah, and education. Interesting. Another one to read, because kids, no matter what class they're in, they probably have some emotional poverty. Right. Yeah. Thank you all so much for being a part of this. I will say on November 30th at 11 a.m. I don't know why I'm blanking. We have a conversation. Well, I don't know if it's going to be a podcast or actually put out on November 30th, 11 a.m. I believe you're right, Sam. Sorry. About connecting as part of our holiday outreach. And this is going to be more mental health focused, that we're kind of doing our first little foray of connecting the dots between serving those in need in our communities through 200,000 More Reasons Ministries to why promoting a stable and healthy family life, because that's part of this long-term strategy for alleviating poverty. Y'all are incredible. Thank you so much for your participation. And thank you for being flexible with us as Sam and I kind of take turns and have to do last minute things that we had not planned on when we scheduled this. We love you all very much. I'm going to close this in prayer, and please follow up. Do the Google form just so that we know how to follow up specifically and what to offer, not just you all, but anybody else in the conference, because we feel like you all are doing as much work and important work as that can be a mentor and model for others. And so we know that there are other people out there like you too. We want to connect. So please make sure you fill out that Google form or email us how we can be of support. Let us pray. Holy God, we thank you for the past 5 weeks and the hearts of each of those who have been on these webinars with us, Zoom calls with us. Lord God, we know that we all seek to serve you, to serve those in need in ways that are uplifting, full of mutuality and love and care and grace. And we just want to continue to learn how to serve everyone better. God, through these conversations, help us to remember what we've learned. Help us to have instances and flashes of, oh yes, this language is not about, it's not antagonizing, but it's about what's important to this person. How can I connect? Lord, help us to have those small little breath prayers and Holy Spirit guiding us when we are interacting with those who are not like us, and help us to build a bridge between us. Guide us in all that we do, God, and in that we are serving you, giving glory to you, and sharing your love with the world. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you all. I'll miss seeing y'all. We may have a surprise meeting at some point and check back in with everybody and say, what's going on? So Sam and I have truly enjoyed being with you guys. Thank y'all
Just
so
make sure
much.
you feed us.
I know, we will.